Tom Clark's 6M podcast is a Boink Studios production. And now, on with the show.
Hey, what is up? Welcome to Tom Clark's 6M podcast. I'm your host, Tom Clark, and in this episode, I'm joined by co-host Phil Lindsey.
November 22nd, 1963. President John F. Kennedy is gunned down in Dallas, Texas. And the killer is supposedly a young man named Lee Harvey Oswald, who evidently shot him from the third floor of this Texas School Book Depository. Now, if you live in this country, you already know most of this. If you live in this country, you also probably know that most of what I just told you was nonsense. That's another podcast for another time. But not the part about Kennedy being killed. That obviously happened. The part about Oswald doing it, well, again, we could talk about that some other time. But we're starting off today's show with that story because I'm trying to set the mood for you. The same America in which this happened in November 22nd, 1963, on February 7th of 1964, the biggest band to ever hit the planet landed in the States. And that is the Beatles, of course. And today we're talking about Beatles 64. And if you think I'm off base with what I'm talking about, the two events don't connect, you have obviously not watched Beatles 64, all right? Because it starts off to that tone and then it continues from there. And honestly, I think it's really well done. And I think everything connects. But I think it does a great job of showing you from the get-go the America that these four guys were coming to. And through the years, we've seen footage, we've heard interviews and whatnot. And I think it was one of the ones that I remember hearing from, I think it was during the anthology, was George, where George was saying, I didn't think we should go. It wasn't long after that happened. Why are we going to America? But we can get into that, and we'll get into a lot of other stuff here today as we review this documentary. But first, let's do this. Beatles 64 is a documentary film directed by David Tedeschi and produced by Martin Scorsese. It was released on Disney Plus on November 29th, 2024. The film documents the cultural impact of the Beatles on the United States in the aftermath of their first 3-week visit to the country in February of 1964, in which their historic first performances on The Ed Sullivan Show occurred. It includes archival footage from the Beatlemania era and examines the personal dynamics of the group's members during the period. As we said, distributed by Disney Plus, complete running time of 106 minutes. This thing goes on for a heck of a long time, kids. Not necessarily a bad thing, just giving you fair warning. But that is your lowdown on the Beatles 64. So Phil, I know you watched this, and we have not talked about this at all off mic on how you liked it, what your thoughts were, so this will be fresh for both of us. What are your thoughts on Beatles 64 coming into this podcast here today?
I thought it was good. I was excited to see that Scorsese was attached to it. Scorsese, of course, directed that great George Harrison documentary that was on HBO a few years ago. And he just seems like a massive fan of that time period and those artists. So I was glad to see him involved. Well, I thought it was good. I thought the way that they used the archive footage was kind of brilliant. I wouldn't have thought to start with the Kennedy stuff because when it first started, I was looking around like, wait, did I start the right documentary?
Yeah, same.
But I thought the way that they pulled it all around full circle was very creative, very bittersweet in some ways, especially the bits with John and John saying how he didn't want to come to America because he was worried about the violence. And of course, now we know how he passed, unfortunately.
Yeah.
That was a bit sad to watch, but I thought overall it was very good. I mean, the amount of footage that they had, not just of the Beatles, but of all of the stuff around it, like the footage they had inside that family's house where they were watching the Ed Sullivan Show, which I've never seen before. I was like, where did they even get this?
Man, I've seen a lot of this footage already, the stuff that's been floating around through the years, but I got to tell you, dude, there was a lot of things in here I've never seen before. I found that to be very fun, very cool to see, man.
Yeah, like some of the stuff where they interview the girls on the streets, and some of the like the smaller slice of life stuff with Americans. I had never seen any of that stuff before.
Yeah. And we'll get to it, but there's a lot of interviews in this thing that's very cool too. I got to tell you, it's like it happens like 6 or 7 minutes in when they talk to that writer who was actually there. You know, some folks' kids, just so you know, 1963 was a heck of a long time ago, 64 as well, when the Beatles came to town. And so if you're around during that time, you may have some gray on your head or possibly some white or maybe nothing. But dude, Phil, that writer got choked up. He could barely talk all these years later because he's like, December of 63, he's talking about being a kid and his sister had She Loves You. And the first time he heard it, and man, he couldn't get through his words. And he's like, the lights were turned on for the first time in my life. And I'm like, dude, if that's not a comment, a statement, a mandate on you as an artist, I don't know what is. That was a great little scene, man. I thoroughly enjoyed that.
Yeah, I thought the stuff with him and him just talking about growing up at that time period, and you see where he is and the impact that the Beatles had on him. I thought that was very important to this documentary, as well as the guy that went to Liverpool and that ended up being the engineer on Imagine. That was also
Very cool.
very impactful as well, because just like, again, just how life works sometimes, how funny life is, and just, man, that I just can't imagine having that kind of impact on someone that they're like, I'm just gonna go and try and find out where this person is and the source of like everything that makes them them, even if it's illegal.
Yeah. That was awesome. I love that guy. By the way, Joe Queenan was the writer I was talking about. He's written for Spy Magazine, TV Guide, Movie Line, The Guardian, New York Times Book Review, Wall Street Journal. Has been in the business for a long time, but man, really, really good stuff. I thoroughly enjoyed that. You know, Phil, it's cool. Like you and I are fans of different genres of stuff. You know, there's a camaraderie and like a validation you get from other fans. So when I saw this, I'm like, yeah, that's pretty cool that it hits other people the way it hits me. You know what I mean?
Yes, I think one of the great overarching themes of this is just the communal experience of music and like the impact that music has had on people, not just the Beatles, just music as a whole. Because you could see it in just how music impacted the Beatles and who they are, and you see all the artists that collectively helped to make them who they are.
Yeah, because Queen goes on to say it came from out of nowhere, but it was something like it was written specifically for us. He's like, they could have been from Mars for all we knew.
Yes.
It's great.
Yeah, I mean, I just love to see so many of the artists that were inspirations for them, like seeing the bits with Little Richard and seeing Ronald Isley or Smokey Robinson.
Mm-hmm.
And even at the end of it, I thought such a great note to end on, John saying, like, everybody acted like we led this thing. We didn't lead anything. We were just at the forefront of it.
Leonard Bernstein, by the way, conducting through one of their songs. I'm like, this guy's a fan. I freaking love it, man.
Yeah.
I mean, look, Phil, you know this. Musicians respect musicians, and it can be from two different genres. Music doesn't matter. Like, while the world hates you, your fellow peers are going to know, no, this guy's good. He knows what he's doing. He's got the chops. I mean, a guy on Bernstein's level freaking saw it. Like, why are people hating on this band? Here's someone you highly respect who's he's a composer and he knows what he's doing and he has the ear of pop culture, and you're telling me that he's wrong? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff that Smokey Robinson said as well, and Ronald Isley, and seeing black music validated in that way on a national stage. I think
Yeah.
that was important, and it didn't feel like they were just trying to appropriate some music. It just felt like this is music that we loved and inspired us.
Yeah. And we've given Little Richard credit here before. By the way, kids, Little Richard, go look it up. It's in the archives. We spoke about Little Richard here, man, and about how without Richard, these guys don't get to go to Germany. And he had a big hand in their success, their future success. And, Paul's not singing Little Richard songs, and Richard's, dude, it's a big deal, man. Like we can't just discredit what Little Richard had to do with the success of this band, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it was. I love to see that stuff of them telling people how much he inspired them, or the bit where Ron Isley is saying that they don't make it to the U.S. without Twist and Shout, and that is absolutely true. They don't. They
Mhm.
do not make the Beatlemania. None of that happens without Twist and Shout.
And Isley Brothers are legends, of course. And what I love about what I've always loved about the Beatles is that they always remembered where they came from. They never forgot who they were, even when there were piles of cash lying around. Like they just never forgot. Like what was it John said about them in the anthology years ago? Is like we were blue collar, we were working class guys who stayed working class. We never rose above our station. We never got a big head. We never acted like we were better than everybody else. I think that's important, man.
Yes. I mean that comes across when they were asking like, "What is the Liverpool sound?" and they're like, "There's no, there's no Liverpool sound." I know the reviewers want to make that a thing, but it's just us playing music that we loved and playing it loud.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. That was awesome. Well, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag too early, kids. But all signs are pointing to it. Phil, one of the things I love about this doc is from the moment it starts to the moment it ends. Dude, they are so over it. Like they're just hanging out. They're not stressed. They don't look to be nervous. Everyone around them is making it a big deal. And they're just like, yeah, we're gonna go play. It's fine.
Mhm.
I mean, that's what I've always loved, just the humility from these guys, Phil. Like, again, they're just over it. Like, oh, let's just go play. Let's just go. I don't care. Let's just go. I love that about them, man. So cool.
Yeah, there's a clip of older George talking about it, and him saying like, "What was the trip?" They asked, what was the trip to America like?" And he was like, "I mean, I feel like we were the normal people. When you look at everything that was happening around us, all the rest of this stuff is bizarre. You know how bizarre people were acting around us, but we were just there to play a gig."
Man. This goes back to another time in rock and roll. Bill Haley and the Comets, kids. If you know the song Rock Around the Clock, you're not going to believe this. That song caused mass riots. People tore the house down when he played live. And I'm not making that up. They're not dancing. We're talking about destruction because feel it for that time, that song tapped into something that had not been tapped into before. And then years later, we've seen it with other artists, the Beatles, of course, the best example of it. It just, I think it's the right time, right place, right temperature, right environment. And man, when you tap that nerve, that collective nerve, dude, you've got them. Like, and Phil, you can't plan that. You can't expect that. It's just going to happen or it's not going to happen at all.
Yeah. I thought that was great as well when you got some of those interviews with the girls on the street and people around it. And they couldn't really tell you why they're reacting that way. They just were like, no, it just felt the natural thing to do. So we just did it.
Yeah. Mania. Yeah. There may be no better term for this stuff than Beatlemania. I just can't imagine a better term for it. I just, it's, no, there's not one. That's it. It's the best one. It just fits. It just fits. Have you ever, this is something I was wanting to ask you. Have you ever experienced anything, whether as a kid or becoming an adult, that came anywhere close to like it's the center of your life, like it's the most important thing in the world, whether it's a band or a movie or whatever, and it's like that's your everything. Like I'm sure I've had moments of that with women, of course, and various other things, but I can't immediately think of something that's just like this has done to these kids during this time. Is there anything like that that's ever hit you that directly or no?
I mean, I didn't like obsess over it, but in the 80s, being born in the 80s, there was nothing bigger than Michael Jackson. I
Hmm.
mean, like I think most of us remember the first time we saw the Thriller video and just playing it over and over and over again. For example, every time he dropped a video, you were in front of your TV to see it. These were like world premieres. Like it wasn't like anybody else's music video where you could just see it anytime. You had to see it the first time it aired. And I can't think of any other artist in my lifetime that was like that for me. That was just like bigger than anything else going on.
Yeah, dude, I've had that with wrestling. I'm sure you have too. Well, it was just those like a big return or a huge match or a big show. Like I don't know if I've ever had anything that's been like that's just been this all consuming for me at any one time. By the way, did you have the glove?
No, I did not. I didn't have any like Michael Jackson paraphernalia and stuff growing
No.
up. But like I said, he was the biggest thing there was. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
video games, movies, music, just like he was everywhere.
dude, I had the glove and I had the Thriller jacket, and yes, I wore them together. Fat white kid in North Carolina wearing this stuff. I'm not kidding. I'd go out in public, and thank God there's no proof, no pictures, no video. Thank goodness, because I'm sure it wouldn't hold up. But man, I just love that album. I love that dude. It was so cool, man. Coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life. By the way, kids, the Thriller album review is in the archives, so feel free to check it out.
Yeah, one of the greatest albums, if not the greatest album of all time, in my opinion.
Yeah. I don't. Yeah. Whew, crazy. You know, it's a shame, Phil, that had things been different, had things had life not always had is life not always like horrible, and we lose people and we shouldn't lose them. Like I would love to have heard Michael Jackson's voice on this doc, or maybe Prince, or somebody that that just they could have also spoke. Like I don't know, it's just a shame, man.
Yeah.
Of course, there's stuff there with Jackson and the Beatles, so maybe that wouldn't have been a great idea.
Yeah. I mean, would have been great to hear Jimmy talk about like his time in London and like
Ooh, yeah.
them coming over to the States and like similar to what Smokey Robinson said and him talking about how he knew the Beatles ahead of time before because he made the trip over.
That's a good one. That's a real good one. Yeah. Talking about who's been in this. By the way, Terrence Trent D'Arby, who I did not recognize because apparently he's gone back to his real name, which is Sonata Matria, but his birth name is Terrence Trent Howard, but he's changed his name. Sananda. Maybe that's a religious thing. I don't know. I didn't recognize him, man. But it was cool to see him. Dude, that song Wishing Well is still a great track, man. What a great voice that dude had. Really good voice. All right, so we're talking about this special and everything that's going on in it. The archival footage makes it real, right? It brings it to life. I can't imagine this without. First off, you don't have this footage, Phil. You're just doing it's a 30-minute video. You're in and out. But this footage, my goodness, when they're interviewing these kids and they're interviewing adults, and of course, Phil, the adults are shaking their heads. They don't understand what's going on. Like now that's a tired cliche, right? This thing has been ripped off through the years by mockumentaries and stuff, but this is the real deal. This is actually happening. I mean, I don't know, man. By the way, are you to the age now where you're shaking your head at anything that's younger than you, or have you got quite to that point?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of stuff that the younger fans like that I just don't understand. It's just
Really?
not for me.
I hear you. Can you name one?
There's quite a few rappers where I'm just like, you guys like this? Okay, cool. I don't get it, but cool.
My kid listens to some rappers that I don't understand. I just don't get it. Like he'll play 5 in a row, and I'm like, was that the same guy? He's like, no, it's 5 different guys. Like, oh, come on, you're messing with me.
Yeah, a lot of it does sound very similar. Yeah, some of it is just not for me.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Yeah, it's cool that we got different musicians in here, which was good to see. Smokey Robinson, we talked about. Ron Isley's in here, of course. We also have, and I'm trying to remember her name now. She was it Ronnie Spector's in this?
Yes, I thought the Ronnie Spector stuff was really good.
Really good stuff.
Yeah, her story about taking them to Harlem and nobody knowing who they were, because of course,
Yeah,
that was great.
Yeah. By the way, she looks great too, man. Like, God, how old is she now? My goodness.
Yeah, that's another one bittersweet because she was talking about how one of her friends dated one of them or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And then I put the 2 and 2 together. Like, yeah, of course, Ronnie ends up marrying Phil Spector. Phil Spector produced some stuff for the Beatles, heavily produced George Harrison's first album, and then also Phil Spector went on to do some awful things later.
Very awful things. There was a doc about him too, but I can't remember who played him now.
There's a great documentary about him, and then there's the made for HBO movie about him, which is also very good.
Oh,
And he's
okay.
played by Al Pacino.
That's right. Man, how did I forget that?
Yeah, Pacino is fantastic in it.
Yeah. I'm here for the old music stuff, man. That's very cool. Jack Douglas is on here because we're getting some interviews. I loved, and now I'll never remember his name, Tom. And he was the guy that he interviewed everybody back in the day, right? He had the 70s talk show. Everybody came on his show. But I love when he asked John, and he's like, back in 64, after, you guys landed, everybody's going crazy. And by the way, what a great question to ask a musician. It kind of feels like, did someone feed him this question? How would you know to ask this? But he asked John, like, when everybody's going crazy, did it surprise you guys? Did you all look at each other and say, are we really that good? Phil, I thought that was a phenomenal question because I'm sure at some point they're going, are we really great? Because like these people think we're awesome. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I thought that was a great question. But it just goes to show you sometimes that, timing is everything.
Yeah, I agree with that. Man, he was on TV for years. But yeah, good stuff. And then, of course, they've got some, I don't think we had that much footage from the cavern, only when we had the flashback scenes.
Yeah, that was definitely when I could tell that I've watched a lot of content about the Beatles, because when Smokey talked about the cavern and they showed that little bit of the cavern, I was like, oh yeah, I've seen that tons of times.
Yeah, it's something else. It's cool that Smokey's still with us, so he was able to do this. He still looks great, by the way, too.
Boink Studios is the home of Tom Clark's main event, Tom Clark's 6M podcast, and Two Nations Under Ted, a Ted Lasso podcast. Visit the site today for links to every podcast platform, social media, special announcements, and a lot more. Check out the site and bookmark today, boinkstudios.com.
Of course, there's only two surviving Beatles kids as we record this, Paul and Ringo. Unfortunately, John's been gone for a heck of a long time. Just can't imagine. Sometimes I wonder, like, what music be like had John lived? I don't know. I think his death changed everything, man. I think we talked about that here on the show for some reason too.
Yeah,
because we've done a lot of Beatles stuff here. They also showed other concerts here, not just the Sullivan Show. They played the first time that they played the Garden, I think is in here, I believe.
Yeah, I know they did the show at in Washington.
Washington, that's it.
Yeah, where it was like basically like a boxing arena, and they put them in the ring, and just the way that it's lit is so cool. And because you like a boxing arena, it's the way that it's seated, and just like, of course, like the ring has to be the center point of the entire arena, and so just having like that small square with them in it, and like all of the spotlights down on it, and like this massive crowd around them, I just love how it looks. The stuff about Carnegie Hall is very funny as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. What was it about that? Was it that or the Washington show where Ringo's physically trying to move his pedestal around?
Yes, that was from the Washington show where he's trying to move his. Either it's from the Washington show or the Miami show where he's trying to move his. He's trying to move the pedestal that the drums are on around. But the Carnegie Hall story, I believe that's either there. Of course, it couldn't be Epstein because Epstein is no longer with us. But it's somebody that had to do with their booking, and he goes to Carnegie Hall and he goes, "Yeah, I've got 4 like all-time greaters from Britain," and they're like, "Yeah, sure." And they come and play in the first 2 days, and then the lady comes and goes, "I thought that these guys were like."
That's right.
They were like a string quartet or something, and you told me that they were this. Never come back here again. And then he goes, yeah, after I apologized, sent a lot of flowers and a lot of smoothing, I got them to book the Rolling Stones. And then she came back to me and goes, never, ever come back here again. And that's how I got banned for booking Carnegie Hall for 2 years.
That's right. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, I can't, just again, people with such hangups, like, and just to think, Phil, they became everything. Like, they weren't just the head bobbing music. Then they later became very deep. It would make sense to hear them on a rock station. It makes sense to hear them on a blues station. It makes sense to hear them on a country station. It makes sense to hear them on, easy listening. Like, Phil, they just did everything. But at the time, no one knew any of that. it was just knee-jerk reaction. Like no one really knew what they were in for, man.
Yeah, just different times, and that just tells you how different music was at that time period, and just how artists were given a chance to evolve sometimes. Because sometimes artists don't get those opportunities. Like they do this one thing that they're very famous for, and then that's kind of it. These guys had like a massive catalog as a group, and then went off and did all these other things as solo artists. Michael Jackson is similar. That the Jackson Five started off as like this bubblegum pop group, and then they went off and did disco and funk and all of these other things, and they were great at it.
Yeah, they changed with the times. Yeah, as the Beatles did, of course. That's a great comparison too. I saw a video the other day of who was the brother that was younger than Michael? What there wasn't the one that was like younger than Michael? Was that Randy or am I wrong? Can't remember.
No,
But it
him
showed the
and
Jackson Five, and by this time Michael's a teenager. They all are, except for one kid.
yeah,
And Michael's doing the robot, and the one brother, this youngest brother, is just staring at him from behind the keyboard like he's never seen it before. And I'm like, even his own brother's mesmerized by this guy.
yeah. I know Marlon is close to his age.
Maybe that's it.
It's either Marlon or Randy. Randy's the younger one that joined the group after the fact, after Jermaine left.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something similar to that, I guess.
Yeah, but no, I see those clips sometimes of that time period of him as a teenager before, like it's like that transition period right before he becomes like Michael Jackson, like a global icon, and him still doing the stuff with Jackson 5, and it's just unworldly stuff like him doing a robot, or like the first time you saw him doing the moonwalk, and it's like, what is this?
Yeah. No kidding. Well, for the Beatles, there was not really dancing. There was just screaming to the point that you can't hear anything. I got into a conversation about this recently. And by the way, shout out to Chris Patton, who's appeared on the show several times here that we podcast with before. Chris's take on the Beatles is different. Like he has a deep appreciation for them. He does not call them the greatest band of all time because they didn't tour enough.
Hmm.
And yeah, and Chris is a musician in his own right. And I'm thinking, I've never heard that opinion. And I love fresh opinions that I don't necessarily agree with, but I had him expound on it, and he backed it up. I don't agree with him, but he backed it up. And I'm like, all right, I can kind of see that, to some degree. But we're talking about the noise level, Phil. Like, Paul said at one point, we couldn't hear ourselves play. We can't get better if we can't hear ourselves play. Like, do you think that that's, I don't know, was that just something to say because they were burned out, ready to get off the road? Or do you think there's something to that?
I think there's a little bit of both. I think that they were burned out with what became Beatlemania, but then also I don't think that they evolved into the band that they ended up being if they didn't stop touring on the road and focus solely on the albums. Because for me, I think that they made their better music in those last few years.
I agree. I mean, I think their first few albums are great, but when they start getting into heavy or double tracking and heavy instrumentation and all these layered and textured songs, like I think Phil, going all the way back to when they did Rain, Paperback Writer, I think those two songs in particular were maybe the first time they realized, yeah, we're not going to be able to do this on stage. Because they played him on stage, but you could just hear it wasn't the same track because they were starting to get more and more experimental in the studio, man.
Yeah. But the problem with what Chris is saying is he's right in some ways, I guess. I don't totally agree with it either, but I can see his point. But when you look at what Paul did with that group, and then him being a touring artist again as a solo artist, what he did with Wings and all the rest of the stuff.
Well, to be fair, he did point that out. As Paul kind of took the weight of the touring on his shoulders after they all went solo. And then, yeah, that's very, very true. By the way, speaking of the Stones earlier, here's something that occurred to me when I was thinking about this. The Mania, they first came to the States, everything, it was like a nuclear explosion. It was effing insane. We still see it now. We've seen clips. People who aren't old enough maybe don't understand it. I think people of all generations can look at it and understand to some degree. It's like, well, they were connecting. They just connected. Like they were great musicians. They sounded great, looked awesome. They were very, very funny. Everybody loved to be around them. People just couldn't get enough of them. Dude, what do you know about when the Stones first came to the States? Because I don't remember there being anything like this. Man, am I wrong? Have you seen footage? Do you know much about it?
No, I don't know much about it at all.
I mean, not to disrespect anybody, dude, but I just, when people ask me Stones or Beatles, I'm like, for me, it's Beatles every time. I'm sorry. Like, I just don't, people also tend to forget that Mick and Keith couldn't write a song to save their lives. Their first few albums, I think, were just all covers and people were writing their songs because they couldn't write anything. They got to the point, they got there, Phil, but they didn't come out of the womb knowing how to do this.
No.
So, practice makes perfect, I guess. I just don't see there being, four geniuses in that band like there were here. I just never saw it, man.
Yeah, I think that this documentary is a testament to how much the Beatles connected with people, and I don't think it was the same connection. I think there's a reason why when people make their debates about the greatest bands and all these things, they're the standard to compare them to, because like the connection they had with people was just different.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. Yeah, it's kind of like wrestling too, to some degree. Like, if you can't connect with the crowd, you don't have a prayer. Like you have to make a connection, whether it's good or bad. They got to react. And man, if you get nothing, if you get silence, if you get people who don't care about you, that's a death knell.
Yeah, for sure. I wouldn't, like, when you like really get into like musicality and like compare them to other artists, I wouldn't say that George is one of the greatest guitarists of all time. I wouldn't say that Ringo's one of the greatest drummers of all time. I mean, even when you get into Paul as a bass player and you compare him to other guys and what they meant, um, you probably could put a few people above him, but like them as a group and what they did, like their run as a group, it's hard to compare anybody to that.
And they weren't even together that long, like 62, I think, maybe 61. And then 1970 was their last hurrah. Don't even know if they made it 10 years, man. But their creative output was off the charts, of course. Going back to the Suits days, which is what this documentary is, kids, it's all the suits and the boots. It's the suits and boots era of the Beatles. What's your favorite stuff from them during this time? Like of their original hits? What can you still listen to without it? And look, to me, Phil, none of this stuff is dated because I love this band so much. What can you still listen to from their early records that you still enjoy?
Of course, like the major hits like Help, Ticket to Ride, Love Me Do, and all that stuff. But they're like random B-sides I hear sometimes. Like, oh, I forgot how great that record is. Like, That Boy Plays Here, and I believe it also is on the George Harrison documentary. And there's a bit in the George Harrison documentary where George is watching a performance of and they're doing that song. It's such a great B-side from them.
What a great song. When John takes the lead and does that little, like a half scream. Oh my God. His voice is cracking. Are you kidding me? It's so good. I love that a lot, man. There's other stuff they have. Beatles for Sale in 64, which I don't think gets the praise that it should. There's some great songs on that. 8 Days a Week is on there. I'll Follow the Sun is on there. I'm a Loser is a great song, by the way. I don't think we've covered that on the pod. I don't believe. Beatles for Sale. We've done several of their albums here in the past.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, I had never heard that cover of Yesterday that Smokey Robinson and Miracles did. I've never seen that before. It was great.
Yeah, really good. Yeah. Well, I think it still holds the record, Phil. Yesterday is the most covered song in the history of music. I think it still holds the record.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Now, of course, it's been many years since I first heard this, so maybe something else has taken its spot, but you'd think it'd be a Christmas song or something, but supposedly Yesterday was the most covered song ever. Yeah. I love the early days, man. Like, I like the long hair, the bell bottoms, the pepper suits. All that stuff's cool and it's fun. I love the early stuff, man, when they first came, like before they, hated each other and sued the pants off each other. I mean, before the end came. Oy.
Yeah. I just think artistically, by the time they got to Rubber Soul, they were making better music.
Oh, I agree. Yeah. Rubber Soul's a great album. I mean, to this day, I think bands are still trying to make Rubber Soul because it's just such a, it's just what a statement album. Like you could tell on Help that things were beginning to sound a little bit different, and Rubber Soul's like, wait a minute, is this the same band? And then Revolver changes everything, I think. Like Sometimes I think Pepper gets the rep of this is what changed. Dude, I think Revolver changed everything for them.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that. Like the songs you referenced earlier, Rain and Paperback Writer, that was definitely when Paul like grew as a bass player, and you could see like a lot of like the changes in the group around that time period. But like I said, that to me, that just goes to show like once they stopped touring and um, they put more focus on making great albums, I think that they evolved and that they got better as a band.
Yeah.
Uh, which I know people get into they weren't the greatest musicians, and people always will bring out that Quincy Jones quote about them, which I just don't think that that was their strength as a band. Like when you get into like how well they played their instruments well, but when you like compare them to like virtuosos on guitar, like it's not the same thing. But again, that's not why people connected with them.
Yeah, that wasn't what did it. Yeah. And by the way, when they're in Washington and they're playing, Little Richard, I mean, dude, they look like it look like they're in the gym. The way they're moving, it's a workout.
Yeah.
Like exhausted. I can't, to be exhausted after that, just that one performance because they're so into it, man.
Yeah, that's cool because it looks like one of those cavern performances. Just
Yeah.
how tight it is, how tight the space is, how much they're moving around in that tight little space, and that's what I thought of when I saw that. I was like, oh, you could tell they felt at home in this because it felt like them doing those little cavern sets.
Yeah. That's their bread and butter. I mean, that's where they got hot, man. That's what put them on the map was those little shows. Yeah. You can't imagine how rare. But Phil, we didn't bother stating how old these guys were. They're like 22, 23 when they came to the States.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine at that age having that kind of success and having that many people clawing at you and trying to like, hey, come over here and do this, come answer this question, come take these pictures. I just couldn't imagine at that time period how to handle that.
Yeah, it's not. And plus, for them to conduct themselves like men, by the way, Phil, not like teenagers, not like kids, like conduct themselves professionally, very courteous, very humble. I just think there's just so much of a mix. I don't know how much of that is Epstein or how much of it was them. Maybe it's a mix of both.
Yeah.
But man, I just again, Phil, I think it's the right formula, right place, right time, right guys, right ideology, right skills, right talent. I think everything just has to work together in order for that to happen. And I don't think it's happened since then. I know their impact Nirvana made. I get it. I can respect what the Seattle Sound did for music. There's at any given time, the hottest band in the world can change. I understand that. I mean, I Michael Jackson, legend, of course. Elvis, of course. I mean, hard to argue that. But dude, since the Beatles, Phil, who can you even put close to this besides Michael Jackson?
It's tough to put anybody in that conversation of just like the frenzy that comes with that. Maybe Beyonce. Beyonce's probably the closest I can come up with from like this era.
Yeah, that's tough. It's tough, Phil, when the measuring stick is the Beatles.
Yeah.
When that's your benchmark. Like, good luck, pal. I don't know. For any type of music, by the way, kids. For any type of music.
Yeah. But I do think they were prepped really well. I think that that's why that they were so polished by the time they came over here and did interviews and media.
Yeah.
But also you could just see in between all of the media stuff when they were just in their hotel rooms or on a train or something. Just these are a bunch of kids. They're just a bunch of kids being goofy and silly.
Mhm.
But I think that's also part of what made people connect with them. There's a bit where I can't remember who was saying it, and they were saying how they never understood Elvis. They never kind of got with like the bravado and like the masculinity of it. But those guys, they
Yeah.
just felt like kids. They felt like just like there was a softness to them that people connected with.
That was a great comment, by the way. I really appreciated that comment because I could see how if you were a younger kid, that maybe wouldn't be for you because he was so sexual and without even really trying hard. Like
Yeah.
Elvis stands still and he's sexual. And you're like, how do you do that? How do you just stand in one place and put off this vibe, man? But the Beatles were something different. I think that worked in their favor too. If these were four Elvises, Phil, I don't know if we have the same
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah, I think if they had a lead singer that was like up front and he was doing like a Elvis routine or like kind of like a Jackie Wilson thing, people wouldn't have got it.
Good comparison. But again, everything worked. And talking about their time in Germany, they credit their time in Germany for really making them a band, for turning them into a true band, dude. Like
Yeah.
without it, they wouldn't have stage presence, they wouldn't have timing, they wouldn't be able to. Musicians have this thing where they just have that chemistry, and if you don't have it, you're not going to be able to play with somebody. You have to have it.
They were in America, about 14 days? And
Yeah.
that was the other thing that kind of I thought was fascinating about the documentary of like how much like you could see they touched in so many places. Like I won't say that they were universally loved, and they definitely showed that at certain parts during the documentary. Um, but I mean, when you think about like them doing the big outlets that they did and the shows that they did, and then also something as small like, hey, let's go over here and see Muhammad Ali train. It's like, okay.
Yeah. Those pics are great. Those pics of him with the Beatles are awesome.
Yes.
Man, icons. Jeez. As sci-fi guys occasionally, and we talk about movies and stuff, I've always said if I had a Wayback Machine, like I'm not going to go back and affect anything in time. I just want to see the Beatles play live in their prime. That's all. Like, give me a ticket, man. I won't even talk to nobody. I just want to stand there and experience it.
Yeah, there were a bunch of things like that. If I could get in a time machine and just go back and experience it, that's same for me. Like, I don't know, like being at Woodstock or something.
Don't take that one acid though, Phil, because that one acid, you got to watch it. What was the line? Was the brown acid like, hey man, don't do the brown acid or whatever. Like, tell them from the stage they're warning people. Dude, I knew a guy that was at Woodstock, not on stage. He just was there. Right? He was an older guy, and I was like, you'd have to know him. He's since passed on. Rest in peace, Doug, which no one's going to know who I'm talking about, but it's all good.
Doug sounds like a guy that was at Woodstock, just Doug.
Right? He came up one day, and I'm like, well, how was it? He goes, I don't remember. I was doing all kinds of drugs. That's how he said it. He was older and cantankerous, to be sure. I'm like, no, you weren't. He goes, yes, I was. He was dead serious when he looked at me, too. Like, you don't even know. Like, he wouldn't go into detail.
Don't you go down, Doug.
Yeah, right? Man alive. Tom Clark's 6M podcast is sponsored in part by Radius Law Group. Every day, Radius helps individuals, families, small businesses, and nonprofit organizations throughout North Carolina, Florida, and Pennsylvania resolve their legal issues by providing effective legal counsel in the areas of estate planning, as well as elder law and Medicaid. Radius Law holds the radical belief that working with a lawyer can indeed be enjoyable. So give them a call at 1-800-519-5667 for more information and tell them that Tom Clark's 6M podcast sent you. I've met two other people that saw them when they came to the States as well. One, so they each had stories similar to what you see in the doc, because there was no laughing about it. But when I asked them, and we're talking, this was in the 90s and early 2000s when I asked. The first one said, I said, how was it? And she's like, oh, it was great. I couldn't hear a thing, but it was awesome. I'm like, you couldn't hear the band? She goes, no, not a note. She said, but I could see them. That's all that mattered. And she was very happy to retell it, but she was also, all about it. The second one wasn't laughing. And I'm like, so what'd you think? He's like, best thing I've ever seen. I'm like, to this day, he's like, you have no idea. He said, I'll never forget it. So man, it stayed with people, Phil. Like they really, truly made an impact, man.
Yeah.
Crazy. I can't say I've seen anybody in my time that I would take that everywhere I go and say, this is the biggest thing that's ever happened. Like, if you could see Michael Jackson in his prime, Phil, when you were a fan growing up, that probably would have been massive for you.
Yeah.
Can't imagine that. Who's the musician wise? Who have you met that just, have you had one of those moments like I can't believe I'm in the same room with this person? Because I don't know if I have one.
Seeing them perform and just like how they've changed.
I mean, you and I both have met DMC at comic book conventions, but
yeah, there was a time period where Kanye was the biggest thing in rap, and
yeah,
I saw him perform once, and it was just like one of the greatest concerts I've ever been to. But I've since soured very much on Kanye as a person. It might be Lupe Fiasco. I saw him like my freshman year of college, and that was like when I was first starting to just go out on my own and just be out on my own. I had my own apartment. I was living on my own at that time, and uh, I went to a lot of concerts in college, and his first album came out, I believe, my sophomore year of college, and I remember going to a free show for him, which this was in a MySpace area, and
Mm.
because he had a MySpace and he had it was one of those, hey, if you get this message, send it, go to this link, and the link was for a free show. And so the first time I had ever seen him live was free, and I just remember how much it just changed my viewpoint on rap and a lot of things, because just like he spoke to me in a lot of ways that rappers just don't.
Mm.
He's a big nerd. He came out, he had a Wii Ninja in his pocket. He played Game Boy Advance. He made all these anime references. It just felt he's from here. He's a Chicagoan. Like, I just connect with Lupe in a lot of ways, and there's like a through line of me becoming a fan of his and how that affected my life in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
I met him like a
Interesting.
few years ago, and like it's everything I would expect him to be. It's just funny.
Crazy. I would not have thought that. I knew you were a fan, but I didn't know how to the extent that you're a fan. That's cool.
Or I can go into like a whole timeline of like how he changed a lot of things, just how I see the world, just how he affected me in general. But that'd be a long podcast.
Everybody's got somebody that speaks to him, man. Whether you've ever met the musician or not, everybody's got somebody. The Beatles are it for me, but there's others. It's not just them. Other people through the years, just like you listen to a song, you're like, does this guy know me? Like you just feel like they just know you for some reason. Great stuff. So in a 2024 interview with Variety, the director David Tedeschi spoke about some of the previously unseen footage, and one interview in particular that surprised him. He said that Harlem footage had never been seen before. By the way, I've never seen it.
Yeah, me neither.
So you have various reactions from young black teenage girls and boys and a few older people. And of course, you have these young men in the record store. The one guy says, it's just disgusting the way they play that music over and over again. I like Miles Davis. I like John Coltrane. But it was sort of interesting the way the teenage girls in Harlem just love the Beatles, love their hair, love their music. That to me was a surprising thing because, of course, the civil rights movement was going on. Of course, I knew that later when they actually toured the States, they refused to play before segregated audiences, which you and I have talked about here before.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why he would be surprised that African-American audiences would enjoy the music, Phil, because like I kind of thought they spoke to everyone. Maybe I'm naive on that. I don't know. Did you find any of that interesting?
As a black man that likes the Beatles, no, because I've heard
Mm.
I've heard a lot of other black men that don't like them at all, that
Oh,
think they're overrated, but also when you talk to certain women, they love them and they like weren't shy about the fact that they loved them.
wow. That's
It was interesting to see it in that time period and to see how much when you talk to certain people from my age group and older black people, it hasn't changed.
yeah. Again, it just speaks to people. Like, I guess maybe it does speak to females more than it does to males to some degree. I don't know.
Yeah, but you got to understand that time period, and especially what that guy said. Like he was a Miles Davis fan. Like, um, I could see if you were a black man at that time and the music you connected to, that you wouldn't connect to this like doo wop sound, like everything. 'Cause, I mean, look at
Mm,
the music he's listening to. It has a very, I don't want to say pretentious, but like a very like definitive style. Like you being like this big jazz and like um soul or funk fan, I can see you hearing this doo wop music. Like, what is this? Cut this off.
I love Miles and Coltrane, man. I've never thought of that as being pretentious. I do think that there's a level to that jazz that speaks to this is deeper than everything else you're listening to. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, and that's
Yeah.
probably what I mean by pretentious, because like
Yeah.
when you think of like popular music, the fan base that is listening to Miles and Coltrane regularly, they're not listening to a lot of popular and contemporary music.
Yeah. And as we know, Phil, during the suits and boots days of the Beatles, they were just shaking their heads and, doing the shouting. And that's what they were. And people thought, well, this is all this is going to be. And then fast forward, my God, 2 years, Phil. And dude, in 2 years, they went from the suits and boots to doing Beatles for Sale and then Revolver.
Hmm.
Like in the span of 2 to 3 years. Dude, that is In 2 years, they went to Revolver. That is insane to me, man.
Yeah. And you also got to recognize, too, there was the divide. And I think that's why it's so important that John said that he didn't lead the way. There was a divide with a lot of black people that listen to music because they knew of all this early stuff like Little Richard and all this stuff before it
Mhm.
became crossover and before it became mainstream music. And then then when you see like the white person playing, it's like I don't want to see this. This is because we saw a great example of it when when Little Richard talks about the cover of Tutti Frutti and how it's just like no, this is no. I want to hear like the black artist doing this music. And so I could see for some black people, especially at that time, being like, nah, I'm good. If I want to hear Twist and Shout, I'll just listen to the Isley Brothers.
Man, that Pat Boone stuff is freaking terrible. Like,
Awful. Awful.
oh
But
my God.
in respect to the Beatles, I think it took some people a while to understand that that's not what they were doing. They weren't
Yeah.
just trying to like slap their name on something that was already popular among black listeners. They actually appreciated the music and they were just playing music that they loved. And if you don't know enough about them as a band, you probably might not understand that. But when you see so much of like white artists taking something that's already a hit among black listeners and taking it to mainstream radio, I could see you resenting it and going, "Oh yeah, these white guys up there playing rock music. I don't want to hear this."
Because it's hard to not believe the worst.
Yes, especially
Of
at that
course.
time.
Yeah. I just can't get over how Pat Boone never really sang a song. He just kind of talked.
God
Like,
awful.
his singing sounds like him talking. He's not even carrying a note. He's not even bending a. He just like this and just puts music behind it. And I'm like, you're effing terrible, man. Like,
Yeah, that's what makes the scene from Five Heartbeats so funny and so
yeah.
good because that was really happening.
Oh my. Yeah.
Shawawa, ain't got no money.
By the way, 5 Heartbeats in Archives, kids. We've done a bunch of episodes here. What can I tell you? By the way, we didn't mention David Lynch. He's in here. He's a legend. Harry Benson is in here. Jane Tompkins makes an appearance. And I think that's who we have. On tap, Jamie Bernstein, Leonard Bernstein's daughter, appears in this, which is pretty cool. There was a sound. Did you know they released a soundtrack album for this doc?
I did not.
That's wonky and awesome at the same time. Released on November 22nd, 2024. My goodness, what a day to release it. A week prior to the documentary's release. But you know what, Phil? That's marketing, right? Put it down on the anniversary of the assassination. The album contains studio recordings by the Beatles of songs featured in the film, as well as the original versions of tracks covered by the Beatles. So the Chuck Berry recording of Roll Over Beethoven, the Little Richard recording of Long Tall Sally. The compilation also includes a cover of Yesterday by Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. You'll have to check it out now. That's pretty cool. I like that. Yeah. Yeah, great stuff in here. By the way, kids, we have to also mention, as we're doing this, that a lot of the footage that you're seeing in this doc, Albert Macy's and David Macy, actually it's Maysles, I believe, utilized for the film What's Happening, the Beatles in the USA in 64. So a lot of the footage you see came directly from that. It just looks as crisp and clean today as I'm sure it looked in 64. I just, freaking nuts, man. I just think it stands out, Phil. I think of, television becoming television in the 50s, and like television's only been around for 10 years at this point when these guys hit. I mean, it's that there's something to be said for that. Like nothing had come before them that looked like this. I mean, again, I just don't think you can compare Elvis to them. I just don't think that works. And then, I thought it was cool that they read that telegram in here where Tom Parker and Elvis was congratulating them on appearing on the Ed Sullivan Show. And then I'm thinking, you're the same guy that tried to get them deported later. Like, in case you didn't know, kids, Elvis tried to have them deported because he was threatened by them.
I did not know that.
Yeah, dude. Come on.
They weren't here that long. What do you mean? Like they lived here? You can't...
Right? Yeah. Yeah. Freaking nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, deportation jokes probably won't go too well in 2025, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. But he had his own struggles at the time with the
That's
Colonel.
fair. Yeah. I mean, had things been different, had John not been killed, had Elvis gotten away from Parker, you know what I mean? Like, I think Elvis would have lived to be an old man. I just think he was, not saying he wasn't responsible for his own actions, not saying that, but, that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah,
So,
I wonder how much his career probably would have differed if he got a chance to do what they did and stop doing like the touring and stop doing the residency in Vegas, and he got to go overseas and um, make other music and grow as an artist because he didn't get that opportunity.
well, he tried to play Japan. They wanted to book him for Budokan Hall in
Yeah.
Japan. Would have been massive. Parker couldn't travel because he didn't have passports. He couldn't go. So they
Yes.
said no.
Um,
Like,
which
dude.
if you've seen the Elvis movie, that's all covered in the Elvis movie, and it's
Yeah.
really like big opportunities. Use this guy up until there was nothing left.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a shame. And we've mentioned this on the show, I'm sure. I know we have. That, one of the things that Paul said in the anthology was he always kind of felt bad for Elvis because Elvis had a posse, he had his boys around him, but there was only one Elvis. And Paul's like, with us, there was four Beatles. We each knew what the other one was going through. We were here for each other. We supported each other. And Elvis didn't have anybody. So,
Yeah.
something to be said for that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really fair, and of course they didn't have somebody like Brian that cared about them, that cared about their growth, and cared
Mm.
about presenting them in the way that they were presented.
I mean, he got them in the suits. He got them out of the leather.
Yes.
I mean, Phil, the Beatles ain't coming here in leather. Can you imagine how different that would have been had they not had the haircuts and they were still wearing the leather and slicking their hair back like Gene Vincent and Elvis Presley? I don't think that would have worked either.
No, it wouldn't have hit the same, and that's why timing is everything. The timing that they came as a group, they had their look and everything fine tuned. And like you said, TV was just becoming a thing. Doing the Ed Sullivan Show at that time, at the precipice of television. I mean, uh, when the one woman is talking about how she had to convince her parents to let her watch it during dinner, and then they rolled the TV into the dining room.
Yeah.
Different times, man. Totally different times.
Yeah. Crazy. Wheel the TV. I never had a TV on wheels, but we did have the huge TV. Like we did have the huge floor TV that had a stereo built in. You just flip open the top,
Hmm.
like the wood, and then we had just the TV. That thing my mom and stepdad had for years after I left the house, and it was so bad that the speakers were cracked, and you could hear it when they turned it up loud. It was terrible, and
uh, yeah, I definitely said privilege when she was talking about it. Yeah, we rolled the TV from the library. I was like, yeah, library in your house?
God, yeah. Wasn't that Bernstein's daughter that said that?
I believe so.
Wow. Library, dude. Man, we had a black and white TV when I was a kid. I was happy to have it. Like, it was a tiny little personal black and white TV that when we got a color TV, Tom got to take it in his room. And I was ecstatic. I was a kid. I was like, I'm on TV. Look out. Right? 10-inch screen,
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember having the TV with the tuner and the dial. Yeah.
But did you have the pliers? Because the
Uh,
knob broke off.
no, but I remember like the having a tuner and the antenna and everything. Different time. Those kids don't know nothing about that.
Telling you, man. Knob broke off. We had pliers. And we used them for so many years that you couldn't grip the stem anymore. Okay. You couldn't even. It took an act of Congress to turn the stem, just to turn the freaking channel. Yeah, dude. Kids today with their hula hoop and their Dan Fogelberg, that's a basketball reference for you. Yeah, man. I enjoyed this. I'm going to watch it again. I will be honest and tell you that it goes on for a long time. And I don't know why, like I'm such a fan of the Beatles, but at the midway point, I actually checked the time and I thought, am I tired today? Am I just not into this? Like I should be into this, but maybe feel like Get Back was such a such a great moment, such a crowning achievement of work on the Disney app. Like maybe I was comparing it to that, but this didn't land with me like I thought. Like I enjoyed it. Don't get me wrong. I don't know if I'm checking the time. Like, I don't know. Did it hit you like that at all? Like, were you tuned in for the whole thing and you were up for every second of it or what?
It was definitely long. I watched it in pieces, but I
Yeah,
watched
yeah,
it
yeah.
back in pieces as well. So I didn't mind it. I watched about an hour or so and paused it, and then I came back and watched the rest of it. Yeah, and by the way, I think it's a great companion piece to get back. Just like
Yeah, I agree.
seeing like their their trip to America and just seeing like their beginnings, and then seeing like what became of the band later.
Yeah. It's only an hour and 46 minutes. I'm making out like it's Avengers Endgame over here.
Yeah,
Jesus, man.
you know what it is. I we're in this era of short attention spans, and when you can pause something and go get a drink or something and come back.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like that. Sometimes you're looking around like, wait a minute, this is still going.
I went to the bathroom and everything. What happened? Yeah, maybe that's it. Dude, I haven't watched the anthology. When's the last time you watched the anthology, by the way?
I don't know if I've actually ever watched the whole thing.
Really? Yeah. That was coming on live on ABC, I believe. And I think I recorded on the VCR every time it came on and just couldn't wait. Can I be honest with you? That's what got me into the band.
Hmm.
Like, I knew about the band. I grew up with them. I knew who they were. But dude, that anthology hit me feel like I was in that crowd of girls in 64. I mean, seriously, like it connected with me and it connected me so much that it kind of really surprised me that it did. And then I went and bought every Beatles CD I could find of every album that they had. I mean, I bought the Past Masters, the Blue Album, the Red Album, everything. Like, I have to have everything they ever did. I just became a mega, mega fan when the anthology came out in the 90s. And I'm trying to talk to people about it. And they're like, these guys came out in 64, right? Why are you
Yeah.
so excited?
Yeah, I feel like that happens a lot with people, um, whether it be like seeing a biopic or seeing something. Like that was it for me when the Tribe documentary came out,
Mm,
and that was really how I got into Tribe. I was never a big Tribe fan growing up.
that's crazy how that happens. Crazy. Well, Phil, there again, it just depends on how something connects with you.
Yeah, I think it's just that's why I keep saying timing is everything.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're in that right place and right time to be able to accept something, and sometimes you're just not. And I think at that time, and that speaks to them using the Kennedy documentary. I think that uh, a lot of youth of America just wanted something to make them feel good. They didn't have to think too much about it. It just made them feel good. And I think
Mm.
that's why some adults and their parents couldn't get past like, well, what is this? Like, who are these guys? Or like, what effect is this going to have on children? Like, I just think it was just feel good music at a time where people wanted to feel good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly right. Yeah. Well, kids, there you have it. There is Beatles 64. At some point when reviewing a documentary, you just let people go watch it. And I think that's what we're going to do now. So if you've watched it in preparation for this, if you've already seen it, go back and watch it again. I've got it going as we speak. And for me, Phil, the definition of their first tour was live performances. Like the Mania is fascinating to watch. Hearing other musicians talk about them is pretty cool. Even hearing the older dudes who hate them, that's interesting. But for me, it's them on stage and that energy, that contained chaos of them sweating buckets and just really enjoying the music itself. Like to me, that's who the band is. You know what I mean? From that time for sure.
I agree.
Well, kids, there you have it. There's Beatles 64 and a lot more coming your way, of course, as always. Glad we got this one in the can. Phil, before we take this home, give me your last word on Beatles 64.
I think it's a great time capsule for that time period and the start of Beatlemania. I'm sure it's going to be one of those things, like for Tom, that's going to make a new generation of fans that didn't understand what was the big hubbub. But it was just a fascinating watch, even if you have any knowledge of the band. As somebody that's watched a lot of documentaries, there was a lot here that I had never seen before.
Yeah, that's I mean, the longer that someone's out there, kids, in the ether, and the more you're inundated with, footage and music and behind the scenes and all that stuff, at some point it becomes, yeah, I don't think there's anything more I can get from this. But that's not this doc at all. So Anybody out there, if you haven't given it a chance yet because of that reason, trust me, you'll find stuff here that you've never seen before, which is pretty awesome. So I definitely recommend everybody check it out. There's always more Beatles stuff to come here on the 6M because we're fans and we love talking about them. So don't be surprised when we cover more stuff in the future. And there's lots of stuff in the archives as well. So feel free to check it out. And now you got one more thing, Beatles 64. So that's it for us. Again, as always, stay tuned for more to come. But in the meantime, that is Beatles 64.
Hey, thanks for listening to the show. Check out our social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at 6M Podcast. We'll see you next time.